Yeah, we are from Cornell Cooperative Extension for those people who have just joined. And what you're going to see, I hope, is my first slide, building a
Yes.
backyard wildlife habitat, a gardener's approach. And the reason why I say gardener's approach is because, like I do in all of my presentations, I give you lots and lots of plants for ideas. This one, I start out with things that are not as plant oriented because the basis for this is the National Wildlife Federation's um, backyard wildlife habitat certification program. And they have a wonderful website. It is on your handout, which includes a plant list of I hope most of the plants I'm using. I update my presentations frequently. The last time I gave this was last fall. I think I've updated it since then. And there might be, if there are plants that are not on that plant list that I mentioned and that you're interested in, please ask. My email is also on that, my email address, and I welcome questions after the fact on my email. So you can also get more information that way. But on that handout, which is the plant list, will be, and also the other handout, which is the checklist from the National Wildlife Federation. It's the basic checklist, the one-page checklist. Both of those have on it the source website, which is nwf.org, National Wildlife Federation.org. So we will start by talking about our goals. Basically, this talk is to inspire you and give you lots of ideas for how to build a wildlife habitat into your home landscape that's going to make you a conservation participant. First, we want to describe the beneficial garden visitors and what their needs are. We're going to offer ideas for garden design that best supports wildlife. We're going to provide National Wildlife Federation guidelines for certification, and a lot of our information comes from the website and is dealt with in much more depth on their website. So I'll invite you to go there because we only have an hour to kind of skim over the top tonight and to give you lots of plant ideas. Like I say, have to do that. Have to show pretty pictures, especially now. Is my background? Yeah, my background is my summer garden. So see one of my summer gardens. Yeah, we need this right now. The gray blanket that we've been looking, the gray blanket in the sky and the gray blanket of snow on the ground. We need plants. And finally, we're all of my presentations try to use the best practices from Cornell Cooperative Extension and Cornell Gardening for sustainable, attainable landscapes. That's our goal. By the way, I give lots of different presentations. Protecting gardens from destruction by deer is a different presentation. We're not talking about welcoming deer as beneficial garden visitors. If you've got questions about deer, we can't answer them tonight, is the point. We could take the entire night talking about deer, but we will not. We will hopefully control ourselves. So the idea is that we all need to garden as if life depended on it. The quote is, every time a species is lost from an ecosystem, that ecosystem is less able to support us. And that quote came from Dr. Doug Tallamy, who is a professor at the University of Delaware and the author of the classic Bringing Nature Home, which is the resource book that people in conservation who are talking with home gardeners and home landscape people refer to. This is, if there's only one book that you get from your library, and you can get it from the library, and what will happen when you get it from your library system is that you will look at it and you'll say, I want this book, and you'll buy it. I hope, because it is that good a source. But all of the sources we're talking about here are available from your library. The Mid-Hudson Library System is an excellent source for even books that aren't at East Fishkill, because they can get them in a couple of days from another library in the system. And if you haven't done that online, you go to East Fishkill Library's website and they make it very easy. But Dr. Doug Tallamy is the expert that people turn to because he thinks we all can participate in conservation. Just because we're a homeowner or a resident caretaker of a very small plot of the environment doesn't mean that we aren't influential. Our collective impact is huge. 85% of the US is privately owned. The private owners need to take part in conservation. Our properties are an opportunity for long-term conservation if we design them to meet the needs of the life around us. There's a theme. So the balance of life, he talks about it in the book. Let me just give you this little unfolding scenario. Native insects need native plants to survive. Native birds and mammals need native insects as well as plants to survive. Therefore, no native insects, no higher forms of life. That sounds oversimplified. It might even be oversimplified. We are going to talk about native plants as being hugely important, but in general, conservation of wildlife depends on plants and the insects that feed them, because one of the quotes is, if you count all the terrestrial bird species in North America that rely on insects to feed their young, you would find that figure to be about 96%. 96% of bird species in North America that rely on insects to feed their young. 96% of insects rely on, of birds. North American birds rely on insects to feed their young. It's huge. But let's define native. Just what is a native plant? There are a lot of definitions. We use this one for this presentation: a plant that is part of the balance of nature that has developed over hundreds of or thousands of years in a particular region or ecosystem. The word native is supposed to be used with a geographic qualifier, like a New England native, even New York native. And you'll find, when you go to the Master Gardener plant sale, that on the signs for the plants that are for sale, it will tell you if it's a New York native versus a US native. It's helpful to be specific, but on my plant list, the way I treat it is that I either say it's a Northeastern native or an Eastern native, if it could be from like rhododendrons or from the Southeast, or it's a US native if it's from some other part of the US, is the way I simplify it in that column on my plant list. But only plants found in this country before European settlement are considered to be native to the United States. It's a high bar. But that high bar is not something we have to adhere to so strictly that it becomes difficult to participate in conservation. What Talamy and others and we promote is balance. Just as we have native and non-native pollinators that are important to our ecosystems, and there are non-native bees and native bees, for example, that are critical. Therefore, we have to have landscapes that have a balance of native and non-native plants. Even Doug Talamy, who uses words like alien plants to describe plants that are not native, he uses the word alien. You could also use non-native, introduced, exotic species.
Exotic was what I was going to add.
Yeah, exotic species describe non-native species too, and don't have kind of the stigma of alien species. But Talamy, as hardcore as he can be, he says, why don't you aim for your home landscape to be 70% native and 30% non-native? That's a pretty good balance. And it feeds different kinds of wildlife, native and non-native, but it helps, I think, to emphasize what today is probably not a 70% native set of plantings in your yard, to try harder as you aim for 70% without becoming a zealot, a native zealot. We don't want to become native zealots. It's not helpful. It's not realistic. So what kinds of wildlife can a garden help? The National Wildlife Federation concentrates on 4 groups. These are the smaller wildlife that can safely coexist with people in settled areas. And when you're talking about smaller wildlife that can safely coexist with us, you're not talking about deer, you're not talking about bears, and you're not talking about attracting things that are not helpful to our gardens usually. Even in that small mammal category, you may find some things like the chipmunks, squirrels that can be mischievous or downright vandalous. If you want to control them, there are different information sheets. Just contact contact Joyce. She has information sheets at Cornell. And by the way, if you do want to contact Joyce, or get other information from the Cornell website, that address is on, I think, the handout as well, is CCE for Cornell Cooperative Extension, CCEDuchess.org. CCEDuchess.org, and when you get there, you click on gardening. That gets you to the page that Joyce manages, and her contact information is at the bottom. There are lots of other kinds of information that she can give you, and there are other talks that I will mention as I go through this talk, because this talk actually uses as source material a lot of other of my talks. The National Wildlife Federation talks about 5 different categories of contributions that home gardeners need to pay attention to. And in fact, when you're talking about certification, they ask you for 2 out of the 3 of the following number of things, for example, in the food category. We're going to be talking about food, water, cover, and places to raise young. When we're talking about, I'm going to give you some examples with birds, with butterflies, and with amphibians. But that last category, sustainable practices, is one that National Wildlife Federation has increased multiple times over the last few years since I first did this presentation, that I had to update a lot. Doug Talamy's updated the native part of the NWF website significantly, but sustainable practices in general have been really embellished. But let's start with the top 4, with the first few, and give as an example what happens with birds on their certification. They ask you to provide water year-round for birds if you can, and these are objectives, by the way, that again, if you fulfill 2 of the 7 of these, or 3 of the 7 of these, it would certify you. But it gives you a really nice menu of things that you can do. That checklist that you're looking at will give you a way to survey your current landscape and decide whether you can do more. You might have bird baths, for example, but do you have a heater for that bird bath in the winter? And that may not be, they come with cords. Some of them are solar, but more reliable are the ones with electric cords. So I have a heater I take in my bird bath from my garden, just the top, and I put it on my patio table so it's closer to the house and to the electrical outlet. And I put a bird bath heater in there, immersible bird bath heater. They don't have to be expensive.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I looked out my window this morning and I moved and they flew, but there was a turned over top to a compost bin. So it was black plastic.
Yeah.
It had ice in it, which was
Yeah.
melted. And
Yeah.
there were 5 bluebirds that were working their way around the edges because the sun is getting strong. We're already 3 weeks past the solstice, or 4.
That's right.
So
That's
even
right.
if you take something and site it where it's a dark container in the sunshine, you've got something that you're
Oh, you just upgraded the presentation. That's a great idea. You don't have to go out and buy an immersible heater. You can get a black plastic. I actually also use a dark colored plastic saucer, dark green plastic saucer that I got. It's like an 18-inch saucer for a big plant, but I use that and I put some rocks in it, and so that they have a place to perch on the side. And what's really cool about any heated bird bath is that it can snow a foot, and you'll see the birds perching on the snowbank around the heated water, and you'll see the steam come up, and other wildlife, chipmunks and other things will come to drink from your bird bath too, if it's at ground level. So that's a wonderful part of the menu. You want to install trees and shrubs for cover, and they also provide year-round food. Trees and shrubs are what we call the woodies. The woodies, as opposed to the herbaceous perennials in your garden, the woodies, the shrubs and trees, have structure. The stems, the woody stems, stay above ground through the winter, with or without leaves, depending on whether they're evergreen or not. But woodies provide a different kind of value than your perennial herbaceous plants that die back to the ground every year. Because during the winter, sometimes even berries persist on those plants. I'm going to give you some ideas for that later, for those kinds of plants. Keep dead trees. Dead trees have cavities for raising young, and the dead trees are a source of insects, which you know if you've ever heard a pileated woodpecker. Hopefully the dead tree isn't too close to your bedroom window, because pileated woodpeckers are very loud insect borers on dead trees or dead pieces of trees, dead branches. But they also provide protection from bad weather in those cavities of dead trees. Nesting boxes, that's a huge category, by the way, and there's a lot of information about building your own or the right kind of nesting box for the right kind of bird on nwf.org. There's also building a brush pile. Specifically, they say on the website, you should actually build, you can just have a place where brush is collected at the edge of your yard or into the woods, but you could also build it very methodically by putting larger logs on the bottom and topping with smaller branches, because some birds like to hunt and roost or even nest there, and they start at ground level sometimes. So that's an idea. And offering food and feeders. Feeders are definitely supplemental food sources. People ask me all the time, well, isn't it cruel to, or not good to offer food in because you're making birds dependent on your food source? And then I go away for vacation. What do? Birds will never ever use your feeder as a primary food source. They have lots of primary food sources. Feeders are supplemental food sources to every bird species. Do not worry about that. It merely gives them, another place for food, high value food. Please don't, break up your white bread and put it out there, because that's nothing but junk food for birds. But if you put out seed and dried fruit for birds, it not just gives them supplemental source of food, but it also enhances your bird viewing opportunities. And that's important to your family. And finally, they say you have to remove invasive plants. There are 2 presentations on my list for giving you ideas for how to replace your invasive shrubs with wonderful alternatives of flowering shrubs that are natives, and also perennials. We have a perennial presentation replacing invasive perennials with beautiful alternatives. And the reason for getting rid of invasive plants and just hunkering down and getting rid of them now is that they outcompete natives. It's part of their definition. We only use the word invasives when they're on the list. In New York State, there's an invasives list. It's very much like Massachusetts list of invasive species, plant species. They all have to meet, one of the things they have to meet to be on those lists is that they outcompete natives. Natives cannot compete against these invasives. So your Japanese barberries and your burning bushes, get rid of them. And again, you can come back to us if you want more information on that, but that's an important part of this list. Butterflies, they have a different list for. So for butterflies, you want to install flowering plants in the sun. All the life stages of the butterfly can be served in your yard, but they generally want to be in the sun. Bees and butterflies and the important pollinators are sun lovers. You want to diversify your plantings by type and by color, because again, you need host plants for laying eggs of the butterfly. You need food for the larvae. You need nectar sources for the adults, and even the size and shape are important to different kinds of pollinators, and we'll talk about that diversity later and how you can do that. Plant for continuous bloom. Your early spring bulbs are important to the pollinators coming out for the first time, but really the season that you really probably should pay attention to is increasing the number of species in your backyard, of plants in your yard that bloom in the fall. And we'll talk more about that later. But you need that continuous bloom from spring to fall to keep the energy going and to meet all of their needs from beginning to end. They say plant densely to make the nectar foraging most efficient. And maybe more than one of the plant that you're looking to offer, so that they don't just have one plant and they have to fly half a yard to get to another plant. Eliminate insecticides. Whether you're talking about Malathion 7, the trade name 7, or diazinon, they're all marketed to kill insects. Even they're lethal to butterflies. They're lethal to other pollinators, and there's a lot of other ways to deal with it. We're gonna be talking a little bit about that, but there are sources for how to do that. But this is on the list. Can you take the shelf in your garage that has that bottle of 7 on it and throw out the 7 and make some changes as a result of that? And they talk about feeding butterfly babies. You need host plants that are important for caterpillars. And don't worry about a few holes in leaves. Most butterfly caterpillars don't cause the kind of leaf damage that you mainly associate with the moth caterpillars like bagworms and tent caterpillars or gypsy moths. That's different. Those aren't the ones that we're inviting into the yard, and those we want to get rid of when we see them. But if you've got a few holes in your leaves because the larvae need them, the butterfly caterpillar larvae need them, then you plant a few more of those plants. You want to give food to those butterfly babies. And providing resting places and puddling places. That's an interesting topic, because people want to, for example, they want to give butterfly motels. You see that? That's what I call those butterfly houses, butterfly motels. I had a couple, couldn't figure out why I never got any butterflies. Well, mainly it's because butterflies use protected places like that for overwintering. We don't have many butterflies that overwinter in our zone. And the ones that do really want to overwinter in the dead leaves underneath your shrubs and trees. And so you should leave some dead leaves under your shrubs and trees, because that's where they want to overwinter, not in those. Now, if you want a nice garden ornament, on the other hand, a butterfly house is nice, but don't count on getting butterflies in there, because that's not where they typically want to go through life cycles. Likewise, we talk about puddling. Butterflies, we think they're drinking when we're looking at this. They're not drinking, they're getting minerals. They get their water from nectar. It's the minerals they seek from puddling. And so that little muddy hole is just as wonderful to them. You see, there are quite a few there. Let me go back to this one. There's one there in that photo. Now, it's a beautiful garden ornament. I wouldn't take that garden ornament away from you, but it's not the water that butterfly is seeking in that beautiful garden tile. It is the sand that somebody's put at the bottom. And that's what you want to do, is have wet sand for puddling. Now, if we go to amphibians, we have a few things we can do, starting with protecting existing habitat, because you really want to, with your neighbors, try to preserve your woodlands, your wetlands, your local streams. You want to keep your watersheds healthy. That's a very big topic. A lot more information about that on National Wildlife, NWF.org, but other places as well. But really, in your own yard, you can create a little pond. That lower right-hand corner shows a corner of my yard that by my patio that we had that's just a 3-foot kidney-shaped shell of a pond, an artificial pond. It's a black plastic shell that I got at Adams years ago. They have them at all garden centers, big garden centers, that you put into the ground. I put rocks around it to disguise the fact that it's plastic, but it's nice and deep. And I put a circulating pump in there, just a little $20 circulating pump. and it made moving water, which is a wonderful thing to hear anyway. But it also attracts, it attracted a lot of frogs. Frogs spend most of their adult life on land, but they return to water to breed and to hibernate. And they really use that little pond as long as I lived there. Likewise, in the top left corner, if you want to get kids engaged, this is called a toad abode. Toad abodes can be those, now see, again, that's a nice expensive garden ornament kind of thing that looks terrific in your garden, but all you need to do with your kids is to get a terracotta pot, chink an opening in it, or set it up so it's resting on that saucer, so it's tipped up a little bit, and that's the kind of cool wet place that frogs love. And you can do that with your kids and have a wonderful activity, but it also helps conserve habitat for frogs. So back to the five, so those were examples of how the National Wildlife Federation describes meeting those five contribution categories. But the fifth, the one I wanted to take a little extra time with, like I said before. So there are three ways that they talk about managing habitat in a sustainable way. The first of those three ways is soil and water conservation. And they give you a list of things that I'm not going to go into every one, although a riparian buffer was new to me. A riparian buffer is the vegetative planting areas, especially using trees and shrubs to protect stream environment, the stream perimeter. Using rain barrels, water-wise landscaping, but I want to talk just about those three: limiting water use, dripping. Most perennial gardens, most shrub and tree plantings do not require supplemental watering. Even in drought, they have ways of protecting themselves. And if you've got perennials in the wrong place, like shade perennials in the sun, you may need to swap out your perennials, but your perennial garden shouldn't really need supplemental water unless, particularly if you're using mulch. You can see that third bullet that I've highlighted. Using mulch is one really necessary way to preserve moisture in the soil and also prevent weeds from taking moisture away from your plants. So we always recommend mulch, but we also recommend drip or soaker hoses for your vegetable plots, particularly because vegetables benefit from ground level watering as opposed to the disease producing overhead watering that you don't need to stand there, nor should you, with watering hoses that make your foliage wet in your vegetable gardens anyway. But not only do you get the ground level watering from a drip or soaker hose, but especially if you hook that up to a timer at your hose, at the source, what is it called? The yoke, the hose yoke. I always forget that. If you use a timer, then you're giving your vegetables, especially tomatoes and peppers and things like that need constant moisture, carrots that need a constant moisture as opposed to a dry out and then a soak and then a dry out and a soak. If you're getting something that's more predictably watered, you're getting a better vegetable plot anyway. And always mulch, whether it's perennials or vegetables. So that's some ideas for soil and water conservation. The second category are the organic practices that include what they call integrated pest management, which is what Cornell calls integrated pest management. And there's a lot of information from Cornell. Again, CCEDC.org. You will find information on IPM, which has to do with managing your chemical use of chemicals, managing use of chemicals by using the least intrusive and the least chemical option first. And there's really a lot of ideas within the IPM repertoire for how you can take that bottle of 7 off your garage shelf. Likewise, eliminating chemical fertilizers. If you start with good soil health, you should not need or use chemical fertilizers. And so we start with soil health. And one element of that can be your use of your compost. We have a whole class on composting. I don't think I presented that here at East Fishkill, did I? I think that was at maybe Stanford Library, but there's a composting course that takes your kitchen waste, vegetative waste, your garden vegetative waste, or both, and says, how do you make what we call black gold out of that, which is something that you can then use to enhance the viability of your soil and make it not so necessary to use chemical fertilizers. So that's the second area of sustainable practices they talk about. And the third area is controlling exotic species as opposed to alien species. The exotic species controls. They talk about removing non-native plants and animals. I would say, I'm never going to tell you to take out your lilacs or your favorite spireas or your weigelas, that you love. That's not what we're talking about doing necessarily. But as you're replacing things anyway, because the deer keep eating, your whatever, your spirea or whatever. If the deer keep eating it and you're looking for a replacement, replace it with a native. That's the point. And also replace your invasives and do that now. And using native plants. But that third bullet, there's the one. That's the sneaky little guilty secret we all have as suburban homeowners and caretakers of the landscape. We have lawns. Let me deal with that for a second, because it's part of another presentation that we use about pollinators, creating a pollinator paradise. Nobody benefits, nobody, no wildlife, no people, other than the kids who roll around on the grass when they're young. But other than that, nobody benefits from an immaculate lawn. However, our counterparts down in New Jersey, I think, did this study where they presented survey participants with images representing choices, how they want their home environments to look. And it contrasted, the immaculate lawn on the left with a lot of photos from, some of them were wildflower meadows, but the one on the right was actually used to show plantings as gardens as substitutes for that kind of green lawn. And so, you would think people would go for the the flowers. Nope. People said, I need my lawn. Why is that? It goes back. It goes back a long ways to the European garden aesthetic that we grew up with. What will the neighbors think if we don't all toe that line? There are neighborhood associations that have rules about this. We also just fall into the familiar. It's what we're raised with. But these are not especially adapted to our environment. Lawns are not natural. Importantly, they probably require continuous inputs. What does that mean? You are watering, you are fertilizing, you are using pesticides, and it's constant. It's constant, and there are whole businesses that survive based on the fact that our neighbors think we need to do this. But it does not support beneficial organisms. On the other end of the spectrum, do we have to replace our lawn with wildflower meadows? I have people who come to my classes that, the Pollinator Paradise class. I had one very big group taking an extended version of that class. And these were people, there were some native zealots in that group, I will tell you. They're very challenging. And some folks were really interested in turning their backyard, not their front yard maybe, but definitely their backyard, into a wildflower meadow. But the hesitation you might have is the messy, random look, because meadows are free sown, self-seeding, chaotic places for viewing. They may be beautiful, they may be absolutely beloved to pollinators, but they could be a little messy to you tidy tessies. So here's an idea. The idea is, consider mowing a path, a curving path, in fact, because that's the nicest place to give the eye. It gives the eye a resting place, but it also gives the eye a place to start. And if you give the eye a place to start, it brings order to chaos instantly, because I used in that last picture just a piece of that picture. And you can see that it kind of looks like a random. and it could overwhelm your eye. And all of a sudden, you've got something a little more orderly. You could also use a mown. You could take off to the right there and mow a circular area and put some chairs, put a little seating arrangement in there. That's another nice way of bringing order and also helping you get out there and participate and have a close-up view of the pollinators that you're serving. But you can take, these are a couple of examples of a way to give you a little garden room, a little seating area to give order to what otherwise may be chaotic. You don't see anything that needs to be mowed here. Okay, there's another way to do it, and that's to consider replacing your turf with flowering ground cover. Now, I'm taking a chance because I've given this talk before and gotten real, Joyce has got, I think, overwhelmed with comments in the chat room because the things I'm going to show you may be anathema to a perennial gardener who likes a neat border. These things are not for your perennial border. These are runaway, fast growing, fast spreading things that will replace turf unless you have a place to mow around them, but they will replace turf and be a nice ground cover beneath shrubs and trees. I am not advocating these for your perennial gardens because your perennial garden will become, before long, ajuga, which is bugleweed. But ajuga is a beautiful early spring bloomer. And yes, you get pollinators in places that before you had lawn and no pollinators. And in May, you see the butterflies come in for the ajuga. And then you have some dark leaf varieties. This one's called, I think, chocolate. There's also chocolate chip, which is a little one that's never survived for me. I don't think it's hardy enough. But you get the real mahogany leafed ones that are very pretty and can actually start spreading into your lawn without having to get rid of your lawn first. These will spread into your lawn and you can just keep mowing in larger and larger swaths to control the spread. But they will take over your lawn eventually. Yes, so will periwinkle, creeping myrtle, vinca minor. And again, the blue in the spring, holy cow, that is a beautiful sight from afar as with up close where you see pollinators also. And the green is a really rich green for other times of the year. Looks best around trees and shrubs. Likewise, sweet woodruff, which flowers in early spring, and sweet woodruff is the source of what used to be called May wine, so you know what month it blooms. These are things that are better than other ground covers like Pachysandra and Liriope because they will feed pollinators when they need it in early spring. So I'm going to go on. This is introducing us to the plant section. I'm going to go on and talk about something, just hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are not the most important pollinators. Bees are number one and butterflies number two, but hummingbirds are a pretty good number three considering how wonderful they are to have them close and to just watch them. They're just wonderful entertainers. These are three species, three different kinds of perennials that are the top three. I did a survey one time, just an informal survey of people's top three favorite hummingbird plants. Monarda is number one. And again, native. It's on your plant list. Monarda has, I like to plant Monarda because there are so many little tubes and that's what they need, all those little tubes. And you hang a sugar feeder outside your window and you'll see one hummingbird come in and fight with the second hummingbird that comes in. And so you're only seeing one at a time because they're driving each other away. But if you've got something like Monarda, you've got hundreds of tubes and you can just pull up a lawn chair and watch a dozen hummingbirds come to your Monarda all at once. There's enough for everybody. They don't fight. That's my experience. Crocosmia. I have not had this experience, but some of my master gardener friends say this is their favorite hummingbird plant because again, you see little tubes. It's not a native, but it's got a nice different kind of form and very bright color. This one is Lucifer is the most common one you'll find in garden centers. And then there's honeysuckle. A lot of honeysuckles have hit the invasives list in the Northeast states, but mostly they are the honeysuckle shrubs. which are invasive and you shouldn't put up with. And also the honeysuckle, the botanical name is Lonicera. Lonicera japonica, the Japanese honeysuckle, is on the invasives list. There's no need for a vine for a Japanese honeysuckle vine, because the honeysuckle vine you see here is called the coral honeysuckle, Honeysuckle sempervirens, which is the one that's on your plant list. Honeysuckle sempervirens has so many different varieties that are in garden centers, and it's a vine that will, yes, I think in the southern states it might be considered an invasive, but up here, all you got to do is put up a what am I talking about? Plant support. What do you call the plant support that you put up for a vine, Joyce? The word's escaping me, but I have one. I have a plant support.
Trellis. I was trying
There
to
it
say
is,
trellis, but I was in the wrong window.
Starting with a T, yes, starting with a T, trellis. I have a trellis outside my kitchen window now, and I have honeysuckle on that trellis because I want to see, no need to have, I don't have a sugar feeder anymore. I don't need one. I have a trellis with honeysuckle. Okay, so how about some shrubs for hummingbirds? Now we're getting to multiply the flowers that hummingbirds will come to if you're talking about a shrub. For example, you talk about the big shrub, bottlebrush buckeye, great native. I use this in a lot of presentations. It is a fabulous plant. It is a big plant. It is not meant for small yards or for by a small patio, because this is an 8 to 12 foot plant. And it is, but it has a wonderful form. It's called a scaffolding branching habit that holds its leaves out nicely. And then in the early summer, you get these bottle brushes. And if you see a close-up, you can understand why the hummingbirds love this fragrant native plant. It also takes quite a bit of shade. So it's really nice to have, as if you have trees, if you have a woodland, and then your yard, it's a nice intermediary layer to have the large shrub layer next in front of the trees before you get to smaller shrubs or perennials on the edge of your yard. This is a big plant that has a lot of good distance value, but it's really cool close up too. Smaller clethra, summer sweet. They can be, you can have the 5 foot clethra. Sometimes the 5 footers can come in pink like ruby spice. But the small ones are the ones I like. This is a dwarf called Hummingbird, which is a 3 footer. And again, this is actually a plant that blooms, unlike a lot of natives that bloom in spring and early summer. This plant is really valuable because its fragrant, really fragrant blooms happen at that time of the year when things are starting to look a little shabby. And we're talking about late July, mid to late July. This guy comes in and the blooms are fragrant and it can be covered with bees. But these are good bees. These are not wasps. These are bees that you can walk up to when they are too busy at what they're doing to do any harm to you. They are all those bees surrounding. Some people say, I don't want clethra because they attract so many bees. That's what they do really well. And they would do that really well in your yard to make it better, not worse. And finally, I have a non-native. This is called Weigela. Weigelas can be very floriferous if they're in full sun, but even if they're not, if they're at the wood's edge, it would bloom maybe half of this bloom. But it happens in late May and or through May, long bloom period, and the hummingbirds love this shrub. I love this shrub too because there are a lot of dark leaf varieties. They often have names like the most common one is Wine and Roses. I call them the wine series. Wine and Roses is about a 4 footer or so, 4 foot tall and wide. But the small one is called Spilled Wine, which is a 2 foot to 3 foot version. They're all wonderful. You can see the close up on those flowers. They're all hummingbird magnets. This category, birds love berries. I want to talk to you a little bit about shrubs for birds because, this screen I'm going to show you, these 3 are great fall bloomers. This is the kind of fall color you want instead of burning bush. Burning bush does nothing for birds. Blueberries can feed lots of birds and you if you want, but I hate to see people using netting and things because this is a shrub that should be ornamental, great fall color. The red twigs persist in winter, and the pollinators love the flowers before the berries, and then the birds love the berries. Yes, give the birds their berries. But by the way, you want to plant maybe 3 of these at a time anyway, because in order to get your best harvest, you want to get more than one variety of blueberry bush to cross-pollinate. And therefore 2 or 3 varieties across 3 different bushes is the best way to plant berries for the best harvest and to serve your pollinators and your birds the best. Another great fall bloomer is Lindera spice bush. It's great in the spring. It has really cute little kind of greenish yellow flowers that come out early spring before the leaves do, and the pollinators have that early food. But also we have a host plant for the spice bush swallowtail butterfly. So Lindera is a great native plant that is starting to, you're seeing it more in nurseries now. It's a great native that wasn't popular a few years ago, but it's getting more popular. You talk about fall color. These amethyst berries on Calocarpa beautyberry don't happen. I mean, you see the flowers in midsummer, but the berries don't happen until September. And that's, you know, when nothing, everything else is going down, Calocarpa is coming into its own, and those berries are fabulous. Birds love them. They persist into winter. I tell a story about how I used to have one on my front walk, and Halloween trick-or-treaters would come up the front walk and say, "Are those purple berries real?" Because they're too beautiful, especially for Halloween. But that's what you get with Calocarpa. It's a great shrub, great native shrub. American beautyberry is. And the most valuable bird food in just all the woody family is the Ilex verticillata winterberry. Those berries you see persistent to winter, they are not just full of berries, and they don't just hold their berries really well. Those berries are the highest fat content of any other common shrub berry or any other berry that you'll find in our landscapes here in the Northeast. That high fat content is really helpful to birds through the winter. And it's really, you know, the winterberry, I don't show a picture of it in spring or in summer. It's not that distinguished a plant looking plant, but in the winter, in the late fall, in the winter, that red is so welcome. They also come in small varieties. I bought I think Proven Winners has a series called Goblin, and I bought 3 orange goblin for orange berries that look great at Halloween again, and then the birds love them. So that's a great menu for birds. I want to stop and just go through 3 principles of design for putting together your landscape. Just pay attention to these if you could when you're adding or renovating your landscape. Number 1 is the concept of layering, which I talked a little bit about. If you've got woods around your yard, or if you've got a copse of trees in the middle of your yard, there should be, that's a tall layer. The mid layer is shrubs, woody shrubs of a certain size, and then the shorter layer of perennials or subshrubs that come in to dress their feet and their shins. That layering is optimal for, and here's a couple other pictures of that concept, for not just food, well, not just cover, which is the primary reason. You get birds that can protect themselves and pollinators that can protect themselves, and host plants for butterflies, et cetera. I mean, for caterpillars, et cetera. But you also get a food offering that it reminds me of when they build a buffet at a wedding or a big event, and you get this big food buffet. Mohonk Mountain House always had great big food buffet, and that you put the whatever in the middle that has you know, that's tall and has lots of things, grapes hanging off that you can, but then, you know, reachable, that the food is more reachable when you have the tall stuff in the middle and layers in height going to the outside. So that's the same kind of thing. You're offering a buffet to your wildlife friends this way. The second aspect is density, and you can see that here too. Without going to other pictures, you can see that in fact, you've got 3 landscapes here that don't need to be mulched. I mean, we want to mulch open areas that otherwise would have weeds and lose moisture. But if you're planting densely, you can just put, I put my chopped leaves in the fall to keep the, keep the ground moist and weed free. But by the time June comes, if these flowers have grown together, they're creating the kind of shade that prevents weeds, and they're also providing the kind of shade that prevents moisture loss. So you really are saving on mulch by planting this way. In fact, look at the middle picture. All you need is a clean edge every year to kind of clean up this edge and maybe mulch the first 6 inches to a foot. That much commercial mulch you can use, but you don't need it for the rest of it. Okay, so but density is what pollinators need because it saves them a lot of energy. And they also can see things more clearly if you've got them in multiples and if you've got them densely planted. In fact, I have a whole presentation called Creating a Pollinator Paradise, and it's defined as landscapes with trees, shrubs, perennials, and annuals planted close together because that harbors a wider variety and a larger number of pollinators and other beneficial insects. That definition and that sourcing comes from another book that might be very, very interesting to you, Attracting Native Pollinators. It's the Xerces Society, that's Xerces. The Xerces Society is a nonprofit which supports native pollinators. And this book is another Master Gardener favorite, which you might want to have as a single source for helping pollinators because it talks as much about pollinators as it does about plantings. And understanding them helps you understand why you're planting what you're planting. One of the third aspect in this is diversity. The third principle of design is diversity. And that's something that I learned a lot from books like the Xerces Society, and they also have a good online source, by the way. But the food variety and diversity serves pollinator diversity because you have to know that they have different mouth parts, different body sizes, different needs for different times of the year. You look at the little sweat bee on the left that feeds from open-faced or small flowers, but wouldn't be able to get into. Now this is a cone flower. You wouldn't be able. This bee wouldn't probably be able to get into. Would be able to feed on an open-faced peony, but not one of those double peonies. It would be hard for them to get at it. The bumblebee above can reach into the tubular flowers because bumblebees are non-natives and they're long-tongued, unlike other native bees that are short-tongued. So that's why it's good to have lots of different kinds of plantings. The diverse sources of pollen and nectar go all across the planting: shrubs and trees, perennials, annuals, and ground covers versus lawns, which we already talked about. And I'm going to give you some ideas let's start big with trees. Trees and shrubs are so much more productive for pollinators than your perennial gardens. And I'm a perennial gardener who had to be taught this. I actually put the number in the little bubble that you can see on each of these I'm going to show you. These numbers represent the number of species of butterflies, Lepidoptera, supported by each of these species of trees. So this is a tulip tree. Supports 21 different Lepidoptera species. Tulip trees are among the tallest and widest of the American trees, but they're also beautiful when they're young and they grow very fast. They're attractive to a lot of birds as well as pollinators. Likewise, the red maple grows faster than either the sugar or the Norway maples being on the invasive list of most of the Northeast states. But the the red maples grow pretty fast. They also supply seeds and nest sites for birds and other beneficial wildlife. Then you have birch, and you see that number going up? Now you're talking about 413 species of Lepidopteras supported by birch. Birch trees supply seeds, flower buds, important for birds and small mammals, in addition to pollinators, 413 pollinators. And there's more. The shagbark hickory, the American linden, pines, your oak tree, your simple oak tree, your classic oak tree supports 534 species of Lepidoptera. Do not underestimate these native trees, is the point of this slide. But and by the way, the reason why I use these in particular is because of all the ones that you could look at, these are among the most spectacular of our fall foliage value trees. Likewise, in the spring, we have flowering natives that give us so much enjoyment in the spring. We've got the small red bud, that little red bud, 19 species of Lepidoptera. They basically support long-tongued bees with those blossoms. They have those kinds of blossoms. Then you have the crab apple. The crab apples, that fall off trees, eaten by birds, and yes, deer, but lots of other wildlife that can be attracted by the crab apples. But the flowering is also supporting 311 species of butterflies. And Amelanchier, serviceberry, shadlow. That is a beautiful spring, fragrant, by the way, fragrant spring blooming tree that has a beautiful structure. It's usually a multi-stemmed, sometimes classified as a big shrub as opposed to a small tree, but it's multi-stemmed and has a beautiful structure when it's not in leaf or in flower, but the flowers are fragrant in the spring and are, by the way, a favorite of cedar waxwings. If you don't have enough cedar waxwings in your yard, try growing a serviceberry. Let's go some perennials and start with the spring to the summer. We're going to go through the bloom cycle with perennials to provide diversity for our pollinators and other wildlife. Baptisia. Baptisia, you're looking at a white here, which is the classic native, the mother of them all. But the typical ones you're finding in nurseries are blue, and they're beautiful because those blue pea blossoms are they stand up, they wave in the breeze, they stand up. As a herbaceous shrub, it's very valuable because it gets to be very big, very fast, and blooms in May. From nothing, from ground level. You cut it all back in the fall. Therefore it's considered a perennial rather than a woody, but it's basically a shrub, and it's got beautiful foliage. And in blue or in pinks, they're actually offering pinks now in nurseries. They're very available, and they don't like to be moved. Once you plant them, don't think you can replant them someplace else, because they have a long tap root, and they don't like to be moved. Tradescantia. Spiderwort's a terrible name to bear when you're as beautiful as Tradescantia, and also precious because these little flowers open in the morning and they close at night. They are beautiful. They're really nice along wetland areas, along streams, but they do fine in perennial gardens. Do I have any other information about Tradescantia? I love the blue. That's a really true blue.
They're great cut flowers too, because they've got that cascading leaf.
Oh yeah.
And there's whites and there's purples, and I shove them as the greens for my cut flowers.
Good for you. Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. Zizia is an early bloomer, lots of pollinators. I don't have Zizia, but a lot of people really love it because it blooms early. It has it's hard to capture that gold in photos, apparently. It's a beautiful, happy spring gold, as opposed to a late fall kind of, more mellow gold. For summer bloom, some of the favorites, your common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. Your common milkweed is something people go for because they want to protect the monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies use Asclepias as a species as a host plant, and specifically need Asclepias for laying eggs that become larvae and become monarchs. And so people want to have, but you know what? If you don't have, remember that meadow I showed you? If you don't want a meadow, if you're trying to plant something in your perennial border, these can get very messy because the seed is and then the seed, they sell seed everywhere, not where you planted them. We also recommend Asclepias incarnata, which is another kind of Asclepias. Any Asclepias is a good host plant for a monarch butterfly, by the way. But the swamp milkweed incarnata spreads by underground runner as opposed to self-seeding prolifically, and is a little easier to control. And it has a beautiful pink flower. Liatris, the blazing stars, are beautiful plants. I love them because they're unusual. They bloom from top to bottom as opposed to bottom to top. Did I say that backwards? Yeah, you typically bottom. I liked it. Yes, they bloom bottom to top, which is unusual. So the dead flowers are around the bottom, and I just scrape them off and bring them as cup flowers when they have little pom-poms at the top. It takes a long time for them to complete their bloom cycle, and in all that time, the pollinators love them.
And
They
they
come in red.
spread beautifully. They self-seed and spread if you leave them.
They
Beautiful.
do. They make clumps, meaning that and they're very neat clumps, like you see here. They're very neat clumps, and it may self-seed over here, another neat clump. You can pull that clump and put it somewhere else, or you can compost it, but it doesn't spread in a way that makes it difficult to keep up with. It just makes babies nicely, is the point. And they're neat. They're very neat and tidy. Chelone is your turtle head, and the white turtle head is, again, the mother of them all, but typically you see pink chelone in the nurseries. And my favorite lately, turtle heads are great for kids. You just have to be careful because, you know, the kids want to squeeze the little head and make the mouth move, and sometimes there's a bee in there. So you just have to make sure you expect there could be a bee in there because they're great pollinator plants. My favorite lately is a new cultivar called Hot Lips. What's not to like? Hot Lips turtle head. The foliage is improved too, and it's also only about 18 inches as opposed to 2 feet. So it's hybridized to be more controllable. And then late summer to fall bloom, which is an important transition for butterflies in particular. You've got your echinacea, purple coneflower. And I say purple coneflower purposely because coneflowers have been hybridized to be anything but what this mother species looks like. I mean, they're now orange and green and blue, and and that seed head has now been obscured by double flowering cone flowers, which makes it very hard for birds and for butterflies to access that seed head. And likewise, in all that hybridizing, to take it further and further away from the mother purple, you get a hit on hardiness. There is no doubt that the further you get away from the purple coneflower, the more likely it is that coneflower is going to be an annual that you plant, not a perennial. And yet there are some that come back, and I still try them every year. Helenium is called sneezeweed. It is because people thought this time of the year is when you start getting ragweed, common ragweed, and people associated the effect of ragweed, which is sneezing and allergies, with lots of other plants that start to bloom at the same time. This is not something that causes sneezing. There are no allergens. The pollen doesn't, pollen, it's not that kind of pollen producer, but it is very important to pollinators who come to dine on that pollen. Then you have asters. This is a time of the year when asters, which are fast multiplying, you can control them. You can actually cut them back earlier in the season, like you do mums, so that they bloom a little bit later, but shorter, and you don't have to stake them. I like the New York aster actually better than the New England aster for that reason. New York aster tends to be shorter, and there are varieties that are bred to be shorter. Look at the tags when you're shopping. But I want to emphasize that fall send-off that butterflies in particular need. They need the nectar, they need the energy to winter over and to fly wherever they're flying. It fuels their migration, but it also means that they have a richer source of food late in the season when they are shoring up the resources in general. You want to plant these things in groups for more efficient foraging. So pay attention to some of your fall bloomers, like Yes, Solidago, which is goldenrod. Goldenrod is the one that everybody, because it looks so much like ragweed, that everybody thinks is a source of allergies. It is not a source of allergens, and you should take a look at the new fireworks is a very common, very popular one now that has a great habit. It looks like a waterfall of gold. You put a few of those together, and you get a lot of efficient foraging for your butterflies. Likewise, I want to tell you, mums are really critical, and you shouldn't just limit. If you can buy a mum early in the season and let it establish its root structure, then you get the best chance for it being able to winter over, along with a little bit of protection, like putting evergreen bows around it, so that you get it coming back every year and producing a bigger and bigger shrub, really, of flowers for late season enjoyment of these pollinators. But you notice the one that I used is not the typical pom-pommy chrysanthemum. Look at the bee in that open face, and you'll see why we recommend the open-faced one rather than the pom-pommy ones. But by the way, the open-faced ones, which are more likely to be native, are also more hardy for our zone. So invest in some chrysanthemums, not just, but if nothing else, for your containers once a year, throw them all out. Sure. Finally, let me talk about how you certify your habitat with National Wildlife Federation. It's an easy online application. The checklist that you have is what you need to start with. It takes a $20 donation for your basic certification, and you get free your magazine with that. But you also can invest in, you can add a little bit for a lawn sign like this. You can invest in more. For more money, you can invest in a really nice lawn sign. The money all goes to a good place and to good use. But really, we recommend doing this, putting up a sign anyway. And it's not just for self-aggrandizement or for bragging, although this gives you bragging rights. Yes, it does. But it's, and also it increases your property value, as having sold property with a sign like this and with National Wildlife Certification, I will tell you that it increases your property value in some indistinct way. But it's also because you want to share, be able to talk to your neighbors about conservation and what you're doing. You want to be able to become an ambassador of sorts for conservation. And a sign like this helps you do that. That's my recommendation. So to your sources that should be on your handout, you've got Bring Nature Home. There's also a National Wildlife Federation book called Attracting Birds, Butterflies, and Other Backyard Wildlife, which is just fun and nice and colorful. It's a beautiful book. Get it from the library and take a look at it, see if you like it. Likewise, the Attracting Native Pollinators from Xerces Society. And also, if you want to talk about the whole movement, garden revolution, Larry Weiner and Thomas Christopher wrote this book recently, which is a beautiful, almost a coffee table book, but it's inspiring. It's just inspiring. And you see the subtitle, How Our Landscapes Can Be a Source of Environmental Change. That's what we're here for. And more online resources, which are on your handout. And get out there and garden as if life depended on it. Thanks so much for coming to this talk.
Thanks so much, Chris and Joyce. That was wonderful.
Thank you, Chris. There were only a couple of things that came in on chat. One of the questions was balancing the puddling for butterflies with the potential for mosquitoes. And it was a good question. And I think that if you monitor the season and the temperature, if you make sure that you change the water and keep it really shallow, because the mosquitoes need to have enough depth of stagnant water. And I know that there's things that you can put in water to kill mosquito larvae. And I have no idea what that does to butterflies. So I ask people to read the labels.
I actually looked into that. I can't remember, except that it's, I think it's safe. But it's definitely researchable. I think it's safe because I use those myself for my rain barrel. On the other hand, puddling, folks, if you're putting your puddle in sand, there is no problem with mosquitoes, because that is what the butterflies need. If it all works, if you've got a place where water stands and does not disperse a few hours after or the next day or whatever, then you might have not the ideal place. The ideal place is bring in some sand, get some play sand if you want to, because you really need to have the kind of puddling they need is not standing water, but wet sand. So it's the kind of thing where the water drains and leaves moisture that wouldn't be helpful to mosquitoes, but will be to butterflies.
Good.
Can I ask something?
And so go ahead.
Yeah.
I have a little pond that gets frogs, but the snakes come and eat them all. Is there is there anything I can do about that?
Circle of life. Snakes are valuable too.
I know, that's right. I don't want to kill them. I just want to know if there's some way that you found that will stop it.
The only thing I could think of is, oh, geesh. I was going to say, examine the physical path from whence the snakes could get into the pond. But if it's at ground level.
It is, yeah. And I can't cover it, obviously, because the frogs won't have to be able to hop in and out. So, okay.
That's an interesting question. By the way, frogs, I meant to mention when I was on frogs have been since 1989. There's been a collapsing population of frogs around the world. And there's, despite the research, there has been no answer to why that's happened. And since 1995, they've actually noticed some deformed species deformations, and they're still not sure why. But if you want to be able to participate in the program that contributes, it's citizen science. It's called Frog Watch USA, FROGWATCH, frogwatchusa.org. Will help you participate with helping to examine the reasons why we're not seeing so many frogs. But yes, if you think as an adult you're not seeing as many frogs as you did as a child, there's a reason for it. Yes, but we don't know the reason. How frustrating is that? So yeah.
A question was about the plant sale. We're still working on all the details. The date-ish is May 16, 17. We're still figuring out all the details with COVID. So do watch CCEDC.org. And if you don't get Duchess Dirt, send me an email and I'll add you to the list.
Oh yeah, Duchess Dirt is our monthly newsletter, Master Gardener newsletter. And there are lots of helpful articles that are very local. And it comes out monthly. The only way we use your email is for this email newsletter. If you're having trouble remembering where to find the place to sign up, all you got to remember is Google and the words Duchess Dirt, because there is no other Duchess Dirt. And if you just Google Duchess Dirt, it'll bring you right to the CCE Duchess.org page, which is specifically off the gardening page for Duchess Dirt, and you sign up for that. You can also look at past issues. And by the way, for that plant sale, Joyce does a lot of work, as do committees of master gardeners, to put up early in May, by May 1st usually, put up lists of plants that are going to be available, perennials, vegetables, annuals.
Way before. I'm working on them now.
You're putting them up?
Well, I've been creating the data.
But she posts them so that you can have your shopping list before you go. Whether it's online or not, you can have your shopping list before you go. So do stop in.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
This has been recorded, and I'll share it back with Amanda that she can share with you.
She will post that. Amanda, thanks for your support.
Oh, thank you so much.
It was great.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Happy almost spring.
Bye, Gloria.
Hey, Jeanette.